Dashas. All right, dashas. What are dashas? Well, dashas are a way to understand when the birth chart is going to give its results, when it's going to give its effects. Because within our chart, we have all these different karmas. Jupiter's in a certain placement, it means this. Venus, Mars are in the 9th house in Leo, it means this. That means something specific. Now, whatever that means, it's going to give a general foundational experience to the person's life. Mars and Venus together in the 9th house. It's going to give a passion for education. It's going to give a passion for other cultures, for understanding cultures. It's also going to give a passion in regards to one's purpose and dharma in life. That's going to be a foundation. But when a person goes into a Mars-Venus cycle, that's when those planets get activated. That's when the person is going to discover that passion, or when a person is going to really get involved heavily into education. So this is why with the Dasha systems, we have to know how to read a birth chart well first. Otherwise, we're just shooting in the dark. We're going to pick up Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, and we're going to go through and read the Dasha of Saturn, the subcycle of Mars. This is what it means. That's just giving you an idea of how to assess and get a sense of what's possible. But you have to know what Saturn's doing in the birth chart, what Mars is doing in the birth chart, to be able to make an accurate prediction or trend possibility for the person. For example, a person can have Venus is the 9th lord in the 11th house. Well, 9th and 11th, that can get a person involved in publishing, expressing their belief systems, and being accepted publicly for their belief systems, or noticed publicly for their belief systems. Why? Because the 9th house are belief systems, 9th house is education, 9th house can deal with again, writing and publishing. And the 11th house also deals with publishing, but it's more like getting your work disseminated, being taken notice of in larger groups. So if we have a person going to a Venus Dasha, and we have that combination, well, that's going to tell us that the possibility for publishing is there. The possibility for it working out in that area of life is there. And this is why it's so important to look at dashas, because a person might want to be an author, or a person might want to be a surgeon, or a person might have a karma for a serious disease. But if they're not going into that dasha that's indicative of it until, say, they're 90, well, they'll be working towards getting their works published, but it might not actually happen until they're 90, and that might be after they're dead, so they become more famous after they're passed, because that's when the dasha comes into play. Same thing with health. You can look at a chart where there's serious health issues, and sure, that'll give some innate weakness, foundational weakness, but if they don't go into that dasha of that Saturn and Mars in the 8th house until they're 63 or 83, well, to tell them that when they're 20 might not necessarily be the most accurate thing. Now, they'll be sensitive, so they will need to take care of their health, but the seriousness of it comes into play when the dasha gets activated. So again, this is why you have to understand how to read a chart first before you can look at the dashas. Okay, which is why in the courses I've been teaching recently, this past year and even this year, I didn't even really get too much into the dashas until now, when we've got this course coming up in June, the telecourse coming up in June, because I wanted to make sure people had some kind of sense in regards to how to read a chart first. Once you do that, the dashas make more sense. And with dashas, this is complicated again. Some intuitive people can hit on something and tell you, psychic-related people, but astrologically, there has to be confluence with the dashas, which means, let's say, Mars and Venus are getting activated in the 9th house, as we've talked about, a passion for education, a passion for foreign travel. And so that's going to be the opening, the possibility for that to occur. Now let's say Jupiter, the planet of education, transits that 9th house, activating those planets even stronger. Well, that's almost a sure sign of success in those ventures, those kinds of areas. So that's why you have to get not only the dashas, but also the trigger transits of the planet to line up for a sure thing. Dashas and the chart and transits, again, it's that idea that you have to be in the right place, at the right time, with the right people, doing the right thing. Then you have success. If you're in the right place, but no one's there, or you haven't prepared, doesn't matter. You're not going to have the experience. There might be the potential. You feel like, wow, it feels like I'm just getting ready to do something, just missing something. And again, you might not have all of those things lined up. Like a lot of times people will come to me, and this has happened multiple times, regards to moving or buying a new home. They're in a Dasha of, say, Rahu in the 4th house, and say 4th house Lord Mars in the 3rd. Well, those two things are going to create a change or a potential trend towards change in one's home status. But let's say there's no planetary transits triggering it. If there's no planetary transits triggering it, with some willpower, with some remedial measures, with some effort, some prayers, one can harness that trend. But it's not just going to happen if we don't have everything lined up. So this is the important part about the dashas, is that we have to look at the transits as well to see if there's a transit happening that is similar in idea to what's going on in the dashas. When those two come together, we have success. Ernst Wilhelm has a course on dashas and mutual agenda and trigger transits. I'll try to find it and post it for you. But that is an excellent course to get you start thinking about how all this comes together and what it takes to really make a good, solid prediction. Now, we need to take this a step farther and also look at the Vargas, because we need to see where are the planets in relation to each other in the Varga to see if something's going to happen. And we'll get into this in the next talk. But for example, if we're looking at a Varga, and let's say a person's in a Dasha where the Mahadasha Lord is in the 3rd house, and the sub-period Lord is in the 6th house, and let's say it's happening in the Navamsha, which is commitment and marriage, well, that's a 3rd house planet getting activated and a 6th house planet getting activated, which are planets that deal with stress, delays, competition. So we could probably say, just generally speaking, we need to check it with other transits, is that during this particular Dasha cycle, there's going to be some stress and competition, and you're not going to feel so happy in regards to your commitment and your path or even your marriage. It's a very basic thing to say. It can be very helpful for a person when they get to that period and they're starting to feel frustrated in their marriage. They can stop and take a step back and say, is there a real problem here, or is it just the Dasha pushing me in this way? And so many times, as I've said before, when it comes to marriage and relationships, a person will go into a bad Dasha, and rather than trying to make it through the Dasha because the marriage itself looks pretty solid, they end up making a break or a change, and then they're missing out on the potential that would have come after that. So it's not always the case. Sometimes it is indicated to just make a break or a change, but we can see that within the birth chart, the promise of the birth chart. So the Vargas are helpful in that regard too. And we need to see how all of these things line up. And sometimes you don't see any confluence. And this is one of the hard parts about doing 12-month reports or longer evaluations, is that a person can, pay me for my time to do a 12-month report for them, but I go through the 12 months and I don't really see anything fantastic or bad. Status quo all the way through. So here I need to talk for an hour and a half about how everything's going to be pretty much average. So I've actually shied away a little bit from doing 12-month reports and decided that if people want me to look into the trends, I can give them potential trends to look at. But as far as 12-month reports, I try not to do that so much anymore. I will, but I try not to do it so much anymore, only because there's been multiple times where you only see one big thing in the year, and maybe that's really useful for them to know, but most clients are really wanting you to tell them a bunch of stuff for a year. And I don't know about you, but my life doesn't change that much. Maybe yours does. Maybe you've got a powerful 8th house and there's a lot of changes going on consistently. But my life pretty much stays the same, with some big blips here and there, but they're spaced out over years, not over months. So with the dashas, we can look at the position of the period lord, the sub-period lord, and the sub-sub-period lord, and we keep going down to the 5th level. And wherever we see a lot of confluence, say, the planets say the same thing. And what do I mean by that? I mean, let's say it's a Sun, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter period. And let's say in the birth chart, Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter are all kind of influencing the same house or the same experience. So that's a stronger period of time to say this is when this is definitely going to happen. But that doesn't happen very often. Or let's say we're looking at a person who's in a Jupiter, Moon, Ketu, Rahu period. And let's say all of these planets are impacting the 7th house or the 1st house. Well, then we can make some pretty good assessments about what's going to go on in relation to Jupiter in the 1st, the Moon in the 1st, Ketu in the 1st, and Rahu in the 7th, and be pretty accurate about that. But again, these kinds of things don't always happen. And that's why going through and scouring the dashas can take a long time, because you're looking for these patterns and the repeats of these patterns. And again, you will only really be able to see those patterns if you already know what the planets mean in the birth chart. It's going to be different for everybody. And then you have to do it within every Varga, which is why if you're going to be working with someone, one of the things I like to do is ask, what are you interested in knowing? That way I can look specifically at that Varga and do a good job going through that Varga, versus trying to cover all 16 Vargas, or I usually look at about 10, all 10 Vargas, and be kind of right sometimes. So keep that in mind. You can be very specific, and it's better to be more specific in your approach. And most people don't like that because they have an idea that you can just look at a chart and know everything and know exactly what they need to know. And I haven't found that to be true. Now, again, with meditation, with contemplation of a chart, you can be drawn to the important things the person needs to know, and that is the best way to go. The mind is limited. You can know a little bit with your mind. You can know the techniques. You can know the potential expressions, and that's what takes years to get in your head. But once you get it in your head, then one of the best ways to do a chart is to sit down, meditate, half hour, an hour, whatever practice you do that gets you centered. And then towards the end, you start asking yourself, what does this person need to know? What is it that I can see, that I can share with them, that they need to know, work with, hear, contemplate, understand? And do that for about 10 minutes. And then when you look at the chart, you almost immediately be drawn to all the things that the person either needs to know about, and it might not even be something they asked about. You can just bring it up. And almost always for me, when I've done that, the person says, wow, I was just thinking about that, but I didn't really want to talk about this time, but later on they'll tell me that it was very important for them to know these certain things. So keep in mind there's two aspects to astrology, which is why it's meant to be considered a spiritual science. There's the aspect of getting the information, getting the techniques, getting the knowledge, expanding your mind by learning and studying this thing. But then there's the other aspect where you have to go beyond the mind. You have to let your higher consciousness, the infinite, direct those tools, because there's so many tools, and you've probably already experienced it. There's so many books that say this does that, and they're in contradiction. And sometimes those things work in certain situations, and sometimes they work in others. And maybe there's a mind out there, and maybe it's a few yugas away, a few ages away, where a mind can really conceive and understand that vastness consciously. But for now, at least in my experience, a lot of that is an unconscious process, but it does require that you have the skills and the muscle memory. And one last thing on that with skills and muscle memory. As a musician, I learn a lot of songs, I play a lot, I've been playing for years, so I have good muscle memory. And one night I was at a late night session here in Asheville. We have Celtic Week, where it's a week of learning Celtic music and staying up late and playing Celtic music, and people from all over the world come. It's a beautiful, beautiful event at the Warren Wilson College Swannanoa gathering. And one night I was out there playing, and I'd been playing for a good 2 hours. It was a hot summer night. I was sweating. I was into it. And all of a sudden they started playing a song, and I was so into it from the last song that I just started playing. And halfway through the tune, which is a complicated tune, I realized, wow, I'd never learned this. I don't know this tune. And the moment that I realized that mentally I'd never learned this tune, I completely couldn't do it anymore. So that was a very interesting experience for me, that I had the capacity, I had the ability to hear music and translate it. I also had the muscle memory within my consciousness, within my body, that when this event came around, I got my mind out of the way, and all those things came together, and I was able to do something that I don't think I could have done if I consciously thought about it. So there was something bigger going on there. But the moment my mind came in and created that doubt and said, oh, wait a minute, you've never learned this song before. How are you doing this? I completely couldn't do it. So always remember, part of our training is to get this stuff in us. That way, when we get beyond our mind, what we need to see is revealed through us to the client, because we're all just an aspect of the same thing. So there's no separation there. You're just a reflection for the client, essentially. Okay, so consider this with the dashas. And if you're watching this video before the Dasha class starts, which is in June of 2014, contact me if you want to take that course, as we'll go over in detail, start looking at dashas, breaking them down through the vargas, breaking them down with Lajatatiya dashas to see when things give their results. We host about 24 people per class, and I don't know when I'm going to post this video, so it might be full by now, but don't hesitate to check in and see if there's still space. And if there isn't, that's okay. It's good to take the classes because then you get to ask your questions real time and participate. But if it isn't, in a few months, probably about 4 to 6 months after, I'll have the time to turn it into an MP3 audio download class, just like the other classes on the site, and you can get it there. So if it's beyond June 2014 when you watch this video, hopefully a few months later it'll be available as an MP3 download for you, so that you can explore this. But we will do one quick snapshot technique for dashas in our next talk. And that will be video number, or talk number, 46 of 52. So we've only got 6 more to go in this free introductory course, this survey course on Vedic astrology, and I hope you're enjoying it and taking notes. So be well until next time.